Hi, my name is Brittany J Jones. Madalynne has asked me to step in to record a sew-alongs for her new Madalynne X Simplicity pattern 8995. In this video, we are going to be sewing along with view B on this pattern. Madalynne has also teamed up with Mood Fabrics to bring you a collection of fabrics that is perfect for her pattern. There is a crepe back satin, a metallic knit, and a cotton poplin all in the collection, and they are 10% off. So just click the link down in the description box and head over to view these fabrics. So now let's go ahead and review the pattern pieces that we will need to cut out for view B of this pattern. So again, we are going to be following along to Simplicity 8995, and we're going to be sewing view B in this pattern, which are the pants. So let's review the pattern pieces that you need to cut out. The first pattern piece that you need to cut out is pattern piece 13. This is the elastic guide. We're not cutting this out of fabric. We just need to measure out our elastic when we get to that step, but you do still need to cut the pattern piece out. So the first one again is step 13. Next is pattern piece number 10. This is our pocket and we need to cut 4. Next is pattern piece 12. This is our casing and we need to cut 1. Next is pattern piece 11. This is the ruffle and we need to cut 2 on the fold. You also need to cut out pattern piece number 9. This is the back and we need to cut 2. And pattern piece number 8. This is the front and we need to cut 2. For fabric, I am using this really lightweight challis. I think it's going to work really well with these pants, especially with that cute little ruffle detail at the hem. So this is the fabric that I will be using, and again, it is a challis. So once you have all your pattern pieces cut out, and you have your fabric cut out as well, if you have transferred your markings, let's get started sewing. The first step to sewing our pants is to put a front and back right sides facing and to stitch down the inner leg seam. So right now I am going to put a front and back together. So this here is a back and this is a front. And before I pin them together to stitch down the inner leg seam, I'm going to go to my serger and finish off the raw edge here of the inner leg seam as well as the center seam. I've already done it right here on this front piece. I just used my serger to finish off the edges for the inner leg seam as well as the center seam. And I do this because I like to go ahead and have my seams finished. That way, after I have it stitched together, I can just open out the seam allowance and press it flat. So if you would like to, you can go ahead right now and finish off all of the edges on your front and back pieces on the inner leg seam as well as the center seam. All right, now that I have all the seams finished off with my serger, I am going to find my notches and pin them right sides facing. All right, once you have your inner leg seam pinned together, now we can take it to the machine and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You want to do it for this pant leg as well as the other. Again, we're stitching at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that we have the inner leg seam sewn, I'm going to go ahead and press. All right, now that we have our seams pressed open, now we're going to put them right sides facing. So I'm going to turn this one so that it's right sides up. I'm going to match up these inner leg seams here. And pin in place. I'm going to find the notches on my back and front and pin those as well, and just pin the remainder center seam. All right, once you have it all pinned, we can go to the machine. We're going to stitch at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to stitch again along that same stitch to reinforce it. So let's go ahead and do it now. Now you want to go ahead and stitch again right along the same stitching line to reinforce it. All right, now that you have your seam reinforced, I'm going to go ahead and flip my pants so that they are right sides out. Perfect. The next step is to go ahead and install our pockets. So here are my 4 pocket pieces here. Before we install them, I want to show you that I did go ahead and finish off the outer edge of my pocket. This is something that I also like to do before I install them. That way I know the pockets are already clean and finished. And I did these the same exact way that I did the inner leg seam. I just serged the raw edge. I didn't trim any fabric away. So if you want, here's the perfect time to go ahead and finish off your pockets. So now we're going to take our pants and we're going to match up our notch as well as our circles and pin our pockets right sides facing to each side. So again, you should have transferred a notch. Going to match that up and pin in place. All right, I have this pocket pinned on. I'm going to go ahead and pin the other 3 pockets on the side the same way. Once you have all of your pockets pinned on, we can go ahead and sew them in a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Remember to backstitch at the beginning and the end of your pocket. And again, this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance stitch. All right, go ahead and stitch on your other 3 pockets the same way and then finish off your seam. All right, now that I have my pockets all sewn on and I've also finished off the side seams on all 4 sides, now on our front 2 pockets only, we're going to do understitching. So with understitching, you want to make sure that you have your seam allowance facing toward your pocket, and we are going to stitch right here along this seam. So let's go ahead and do it for the front 2 pockets only. All right, this is the first pocket right here with the understitch. I'm going to do the same thing for the other front pocket. All right, now that we have the understitching done on our front 2 pockets, now we're going to put our pants right sides facing and pin along our side seam. So we're going to match up our notches, pin in place. You should have transferred 2 markings. I'm going to match those up as well. And make sure that your seam is facing toward your pocket. All right, now that you have your side seam pinned, we're going to take it to the machine. We're going to begin stitching here at the top. We're going to stitch down to the first marking and back stitch. We're going to leave this open here for our pocket. Begin stitching at the second marking all the way to the bottom of the pants, and then we're going to stitch around our pocket. So let's go ahead and do that for this side as well as the other side of our pants. I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and at the end when I get to that first circle. All right, so I have my side seams sewn. I've also sewn my pockets closed. Before we move on to the next step, we need to clip right here diagonally under our pocket. And we're only going to clip on the back seam allowance. We'll not clip in the front, and we're not clipping into our pants. So be sure that you do not clip through your stitching. I'm going to grab my scissors here, and I'm just coming in diagonally to clip. And now I can press this seam open. Again, I did not clip the front seam allowance. I only clipped the back, and I did not clip through the stitching. So let's do it on this side. This is my back pant, so I'm using my back seam allowance. All right, so now we can go ahead and press this open. All right, now that we have the side seam sewn, we are going to turn our pockets so that they are facing toward the front like so. And now I'm going to grab my pins and pin at the top. And now we can go to the machine and do a basting stitch to keep our pocket in place and facing toward the front. So let's go ahead and baste right along the upper edge of our pockets now. Go ahead and baste your other pocket the same way. All right, now that we have our pockets basted, we can put our pants to the side and begin working on our casing. All right, here's my casing, and for the casing, we are going to put the center back right sides facing just like this. You should have transferred a notch there, and we're going to pin. I'm going to put a pin right here at the first circle and a pin right here at the second. Now we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to begin stitching here at the top and then stitch to this first circle, back stitch. Leave this open. This opening will be for our elastic, so be sure to leave it open. Start stitching here. Make sure that you back stitch and stitch to the other end of the casing, back stitch there as well. So again, start here at the top, go to the first circle, leave this open, start stitching here all the way to the end. Let's go ahead and do that now. Now let's go ahead and press our seam open. All right, now that I have the casing seam sewn, I'm gonna go ahead and press it open. While we're still here at the ironing board, we are going to press up a 1/2 inch on the unmarked edge. So you should have an edge where you transferred some markings as well as notches. We're going to work on the other side of that, and we're going to press up a 1/2 inch. I'm going to use my hot ruler here. I'm just going to lay it and fold up a 1/2 inch and press. I'm just going to continue pressing up a 1/2 inch on the unmarked side of our casing. All right, now that we have pressed up 1/2 inch on the long unnotched edge, now we're going to trim that down to 1/4 inch. So I am going to grab my rotary cutter here, and I'm just going to trim a little bit off. All right, now that you have it trimmed down, we can go ahead and grab our pants and pin it right sides facing. All right, so the center back of your casing goes to the center back of your pants. So we can line those seams up and pin in place. The circles that you transferred, they match up with the side seams. Just go ahead and continue pinning your casing in place. All right, now that we have the casing pinned right sides facing to our pants, we can go ahead and stitch it at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, now that we have the casing sewn on, we can go ahead and trim the seam. All right, now that we have our casing seam trimmed, I am going to press the seam up toward the casing. All right, once you have the seam pressed up, now we're going to bring our casing over that. And you want to make sure that the folded edge is going right past this seam. You don't want to see your stitching line. And I'm going to press that in place. And once you have it pressed, you can grab some pins. And you can pin on the outside. I'm going to pin through. You want to make sure that you catch the casing on the other side. So I have my pin on the outside, but I make sure that I caught some of the casing on the inside. So I'm just going to continue doing that all along our casing. All right, now that we have the casing pinned, I have mine all pinned, I have my pins on the outside here. We're gonna go to the sewing machine and we are gonna stitch right in the ditch. We're gonna stitch in the ditch, and when we stitch, we need to catch this underside, this folded edge right here on the inside of the casing. So again, we're gonna stitch right here in the ditch, catching the underside here. So let's go ahead to the machine and do that now. So again, I have my needle right here in this seam, and I'm just going to stitch in the ditch. And you can kind of feel a little bit of the pressed edge. If you can feel it, that's good. You only want to feel a little bit though. Be careful. All right, now that we have the casing all sewn, so here's mine all sewn down. I'm going to put this to the side, and now I'm going to grab my elastic. I cut my elastic according to the elastic guide, which was piece 13. I measured it out. I did not stretch my elastic. I just laid it on top of the guide like so, and I cut. So here's my elastic. So now I'm going to grab my safety pin here. I'm going to put it on one end of the elastic. Grab our pants, and we should have an opening back here at the center back. Just going to put my elastic through there and begin to pull it all the way through. All right, I have the elastic all the way through, so now I am going to pin them together, and I'm going to try on my pants right quick to see if I need to adjust the fit of it before I stitch the elastic closed. So take this moment and go ahead and try on your pants. All right, now that you have tried on your pants and you're happy with your elastic, we can go ahead and stitch our elastic closed. And to do that, we are going to lap it on top of each other like this, and we're going to stitch it. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, now that we have the elastic in our casing, we can go ahead and slip stitch this opening back here closed. So go ahead and grab a needle and thread. I have mine here, and I've also coated it with beeswax so that while I'm slip stitching it, the thread won't tangle and knot. All right, now that we have our casing all done, we can move on to start working on our ruffle. So here's one of my ruffles, and the first thing that we're going to do is pin together this inner leg seam of the ruffle right sides facing. Should have transferred a notch. I'm just going to pin in place. All right, I'm going to pin my other ruffle the same way and then go to the machine and stitch at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, I just finished off the seam with my serger. Now I'm going to do 2 rows of gathering stitches along the upper edge of the ruffle. So I'm going to do one at 5/8 of an inch and then the other at a 1/2 inch. And again, I'm using a basting stitch. Okay, I'm going to do 1 more row of gathering stitch, and then I'm going to do the other ruffle the same way. All right, now that we have our ruffle sewn and we have put our gathering stitches, 2 rows of gathering stitches along the upper edge of the ruffle, I went ahead and I pressed up my narrow hem, and I just pressed up the 5/8 of an inch, and I folded in the raw edge and gave everything a really good press. So now I'm going to go ahead and take it to the machine and go ahead and stitch this down. I do recommend pressing up your hem before you take it to the machine. If you need to, depending on your fabric, you may even need to pin it. But trying to eyeball it as you're sewing it is not a good idea, since this is a really deep curve. You want to go ahead and press it in place. So now that I have mine pressed, I'm going to go ahead and stitch. All right, now that we have both of our ruffles sewn, I have my narrow hem sewn here. The next step is to go ahead and grab our pants, and we're going to put the ruffles right sides facing. The seam that is on our ruffle, that is the inner leg seam of the ruffle, so we need to match that up with the inner leg seam of our pants. and pin in place. And now we can go ahead and pull up the gathering stitches. Go ahead and continue to pull up on the gathering stitches. And then once you have it even with the hem of the pant, then we can go ahead and start pinning it in place. All right, now that we have our ruffle pinned on and you're happy with your gathers and you distribute them evenly, now we can go to the machine and we can go ahead and stitch it in place. Once you have it all stitched, you want to remove your basting stitches and also finish off your edges. All right, once you have your ruffles sewn on and you have finished off your seam, I finished off mine with my serger. I'm going to give my pants one final press and we're all done.